For the final product, the second final product is going to be a combination of the blur gradient effect learned in the resources of this final product. Different than the checkpoints, a little bit simpler. We're going to go over that actually in this video, as well as combining it with the final chrome type effect to create an entire poster. This could be anything. It could be associated with your first final product, the name of the band, and you're just doing some different kind of cover art. You could pick a sports brand like I have here, Nike. I like to do a lot of different Nike stuff. Okay, so how to go about doing this? I won't show you how to use the Chrome. You should already know how to do that from the last checkpoint. It's just up to you how to incorporate and to use that Chrome type. Here in this final product, I've chosen to make the blur gradient effect the focal point, the main emphasis of my design, and to have the Chrome type secondary, acting as a secondary design element. You could choose to have it as the primary, some kind of Chrome type very large here, and whatever you're doing with the blur, you can do that differently. You could blur shapes, you can blur a phrase, but however you do it, yeah, just we're creating an entire poster, which includes some kind of other design element. I just have these little crosses here that I've added, and then of course also the texture, and we're also going to do a final camera raw edit for this. So let's get to it. Turn that off there. So you can already see the difference with the camera raw. That it's pretty important. So we're going to go back to this and how I did this blur effect here. So composite there that I added noise to. Okay. So let's just go ahead and start this over. All I have here is Nike. So I typed out the word Nike. Made it large. Rasterize the text. Turn it into a smart object. And I think the first thing I did, filter, blur. First, let's get a duplicate of this, just in case. I'll hide that, and we'll do these effects to that duplicate. So first, I did a Gaussian blur. Now, you don't have to do all of these steps. You can choose how you want to go about your own design. And then I went to the blur gallery, and I added to mine, experiment with each of these. I did an iris blur. You can kind of tell why it's iris. It's everything inside of the circle is not going to be blurred, and everything out is slightly blurred. And I control the depth of that blur with this little center circle here. You can see it has, if I click and drag, it's blurring it more. As you can see in the outside, dragging it to the right blurs it less. And I can control the shape going on here, how large I want it. Obviously I kind of want it smaller because I want to blur more, so I'm going to increase my blur. And you're going to stack these blur effects, so I think I'll do a little bit right there, and I can take these circles and drag them in, right? So that's where the blur starts, kind of. So from here to here, it's gradually beginning to do that blur. But if I push those circles all the way out, as you can tell, it says, okay, let's start the blur right here. So wherever these circles are, as they go in, there's no blur effect, but right where they start and out is where it kind of begins that blur effect. So I'm going to do that. And then right here in this same window, I can click that. I'm going to go ahead and my favorite is the field blur, just because of the amount of control that you have. You have far more control, right? The iris blur is like an iris. The tilt shift blur, take a look at that. Similar to the iris is everything. So we have the top and bottom, straight line and straight line. Everything from here to here is gradually beginning to blur. This is a gradient of a blur. Nothing's blurred from here to here. So this is a gradient blur, and then there all of this is blurred. And from here to here, no blur, but starting on this line, going into here is where it gradually begins to blur. And then nothing. So if I want this to affect my type, I would have to drag it down in more. And you can affect this. You know, this again affects the kind of the blur. You could rotate it right here. I think you have to go to the sides. Where is that? I don't typically like to use this one, but it could still create. Typically, you'd want to use this as your first blur effect. I normally use iris blur as my first. And there's path blur. These are a little bit more difficult to use. It's kind of like the pen tool, and you're kind of controlling the path of the blur. You can click and add a new one. Right there, and you can kind of control, kind of like with the pen tool, you draw out these paths of blurs. This is you right click on it in order to start it, and you left click to start and right click to end it. Oh, double click. But I don't like to use this one, so I'm going to hide that one from being used. If it's checked, that means it's being applied. If it's unchecked, it's not being applied. Spin blur spins it. It's a blur that's kind of spinning. This can be kind of cool, especially if you're using it on a shape. You can make it larger. It'll create a pretty interesting blur shape. And that looks really cool then once you apply your gradient map to it. So maybe play around with this one, see what you get. Increase the blur. You can get some interesting things going on with that. But I'm not going to use that one. For mine, I'm just going to use the iris blur and then some of the field blur. So the field blur gives you the most amount of flexibility, or precision, I should say. So if I wanted this E to be even more blurred, I'd click, put down my pen there, increase this blur by clicking and dragging it, and it's blurring that E out. But say I don't want this bottom part, there's parts of this I don't want to be blurred. I can click, add a new one there, and decrease the blur right here. Click here, decrease that blur. So I have much more control over how the blur is functioning. So here, maybe I don't want the blur to be operating there or here. So I can just add more ticks and decrease the blur. And I can click on any of these ticks and increase and decrease and control my blur that way. So I think that's pretty good. Maybe I'll pull this one up here a little bit. Increase it some. Okay. And then once you have a blur effect that you like going on, hit OK. And then the next thing to do would be to add your gradient maps. I already have mine going on here, like so. And that's the basics of it, right? I could always go back in, add more blurs, maybe mess around in the blur gallery a little bit more by double clicking on this blur here. And now I can see this. So it's helpful to have your gradient map showing rather than just working with the white, because now I can kind of work with these and see the kind of blur it's going to be creating a little bit better. And then getting my Nike swoosh added. Where is it at? I think I have it down here. Yeah, here we go. So just a regular Nike swoosh. I added to this a color overlay of white because it's black. You can, if I have it on top of my Nike up here, you can see it's black. And I put it in my layers panel below the Nike. And I added a color overlay within the layers effect panel here by double clicking on that layer, and I just added white to it, made it into a smart object, and added a blur to it. So I'll turn that blur back on. And it's underneath this gradient map, so this gradient map's affecting everything underneath it, so it's not only affecting my Nike type, which let's go back to the original I had. So this was the original way I did it. I might even like the second way a little bit more. And in my blur gallery, I added an iris blur to it. But whenever I did that iris blur, let me turn off my field blur. It looked good. I liked this part, and I liked how it blended here, but I couldn't get, there's like a little pinch going on here, and I couldn't get the iris blur to do a good enough blur right there, so I added a field blur. And you can tell, right, I just added a tick there, increased the blur, and a few here, decreasing and adjust it so I could get rid of that sharp, hard edge there and get a little bit more of a blur going on. And so that gave me this effect. I can select all of these, kind of move them a little bit better. And the next thing from here, I turned this all into a smart object. Not a smart object, sorry, a composite. So the way you do that, and this is a way of progressing in your workflow, you want to go to everything you want to be a part of the composite, you want to be visible. Everything you don't want to be a part of it, you want to make sure the eye is turned off on that layer. And we're basically taking everything that is turned on, and we're just going to put it all into its own layer rather than separate layers like this. So go to the very top one, the last one I should say at the top, and you're going to press Shift, Option, Alt, Option, Command, and E. Shift, Alt, Option, Command, and E, and that gives you this composite. So now all of these layers I don't even have to worry about. I can just turn these off, and I have my composite right here. I can name that composite. And I can turn it into a smart object, and I will add some noise to this. Add some noise. About that much. Don't want to do too much that the background starts to become gray with noise, but I want enough so that I can see it on my type basically. So before, after, noise adds some good texture to it. And then from there, so that's here at composite noise, I went ahead and I did my chrome type, orange and yellow up here. And the way I got the yellow chrome type is, let me turn off these. So here it's the same one I did for this, but I duplicated another one. So I have these two layers linked here so that when I move one, they're both moving in unison. Because if I turn them off, you can see they're the same thing, but when one is placed over the other, exactly, it becomes yellow because this one on top is set to linear dodge. Just put it to a blend mode. and it became yellow for that, and I liked that. And then I highlighted, held my shift key, selected both of those layers, and linked them, so that when I click whichever one I have selected, they'll all move, or both of those will move together. And then I just duplicated them and put them across from each other, like so. And I got my white type down there, just do it. I added the crosses, and all I did for the cross was just my pen tool. Held shift, drew one, created a new layer. Well, let's go back, make sure no fill was selected, and the stroke was orange, and I think I have it at 8. And then create a new layer. Actually, I didn't create a new layer. All I did was duplicate that shape, Command T, pre-transform, and I held shift and just turned it until it was right there directly in the middle, like so. Oh, and then I selected them both, right-clicked on them, I rasterized them, and then I right-clicked on those two layers again, and I merged them into a single layer. So now I have a single layer of that. So that's all I did there. So that was the crosses. And after the crosses, it was a matter of adding my textures. So I started with this kind of TV texture here, set to soft light. You can see normal, it's just the TV texture. So I set it to soft light, and it was a bit too dark and just taking up, and was too harsh on the background, so I lowered the opacity of it to 50, and I got about the effect that I wanted there. And then I added a scratches layer set to lighten. So here's normal, and I want it to blend, so I lightened it. And then I did I wanted scratches on top of the type there. So I did this scratch, and I set it to difference. And if you recall, difference is going to make it so if I just set this to lighten, or I don't want to do multiply, but if I set it to lighten, you can see the white scratches are up here, right? And the black gets blacked out. So I don't have any scratches on my text. But if I set my scratches texture, which has, as you can see from normal, black and white in it, if I set it to difference, then wherever that texture is going over something that's white, that part of this texture becomes black, and then vice versa. The light marks will be light where it's over a black area. So I get both of those effects going on. And then I added a levels adjustment, and I clipped it to this, and I increased the white on it because it's just a little bit too dark. So right here, increase the white, or I could increase it right here. You can see how it brightens it or darkens it. So it was just a little bit too dark whenever I originally had it. So I needed to lighten it up. And then it was time to do, or now it's time to do all of my final Camera Raw edits. And it's pretty important. You can see how much it can change. So let me show you here. So it's another composite. We're going to go to the top of my dust and scratches layer here. I'm going to hold Shift, Alt Option, Command and E to create a whole new brand new layer with just everything that was visible on it. And this is my final Camera Raw edit. And you will need to do this for your final product. I need to see this at the very top that you use the Camera Raw. Right click on it, convert it to a smart object, filter, Camera Raw filter. Now this is made for, if you've taken a picture of something, Maybe it was overexposed. Maybe there was too much light in it. And you have all of these edits that you can make. And it's called Camera Raw because, as any good photographer knows, you want to shoot and take pictures in RAW. Because what that means for your camera is the picture you've taken, that it's captured all of the information. There's a lot of information there in the picture that's been captured that maybe you don't see it because it's dark. Maybe it was kind of dark outside, or the lighting wasn't right, or maybe too much light came in. You can put that camera raw into Photoshop and you can just manipulate the lights and the darks and the colors, and the information in the picture is going to still be there. As opposed, if you take a picture and it's set to JPEG, all of that, there's no information. What you get is what you have. That JPEG is just the picture, and I can't put it into Photoshop and recover any additional information within that picture because it's a JPEG, so to speak, it's kind of hard pressed. It's lost all of any extra information that was there. So that's basically what Camera Raw is about. But we're going to use it as our final touches on our pictures here. So the basic, and you're going to want to go through these and experiment with them. You can experiment with the temperature, how hot or cold it is, and on anything in here. Right, if I do all of these edits and I kind of end up not liking, all I have to do is go up to that this part of Camera Raw that I'm in, hold my Alt or Option key, and it says Reset Basic. So I can just click on that and reset it. So I'm not going to do temperature or tint. Contrast is good. This is dark's darker and white's whiter. And I'll increase my highlights. I'll decrease my shadows, and I'll increase my whites because that's just creating more good contrast. And maybe make my blacks a little bit darker. Texture increases texture. I won't worry about that. Maybe I'll shift the clarity up. Vibrance is normally good. I like vibrance, so I'll put that up maybe just a little bit. And that's all for basic. Next is the curves. I can control the lights and the darks, or what have you, and I can target specifically the reds or the greens, and greens and magenta. Sorry, red and cyan, green and magenta, blue and yellow. I can adjust those here with my curves. Details, you can mess around with this, sharpening, how sharp you want it, noise reduction, color, noise reduction. Color mixer is the next good one that I'm going to use. I want to get a slightly different tone of orange and blue going on. So I'm going to select my orange and then go to the hue slider and change it till I get the color of orange that I like, which is right about there. And then I'll go to my blues, click on my blue right here, and adjust. I'll go to the left to make it a little bit darker there. I can control the saturation if I like. Maybe I'll click on the cyan, see if that does anything. Not a whole lot. Maybe the purples, because there's some purple in there. I think I'll just take it out. And then the color grading. This is what colors you wanted the midtones of your image. We don't have a lot of midtones. We have some midtones going on here. But this is affecting, this is for a photograph, obviously, but we could use it some here if we wanted. But the midtones in the photograph, maybe we wanted those midtones to be kind of like a dark green, and we wanted the shadows also to be a darker green, and we wanted the highlights to be a yellow. We could affect and color tone our photograph by going here. This would apply to all of the shadows, whatever color I want. I can control the blending and the balance of it down here as well. I'm not going to use this on my picture here though. Optics, distortion, vignette, geometry. This could be cool this is something if you're creating maybe for an Instagram post. You can kind of create a interesting looking perspective. You can rotate it with the rotate, obviously. Keep the rotate. Aspect, it's going to change its aspect. Wider, flatter, scale, how big it is. And then the X, you can move it that way, and the Y offset that way as well. So you can, yeah, you can have some fun with this. Not something we're going to do here for our project though, but just so you know what it's doing. Effects, increase grain, decrease grain. I'm going to keep mine at 0. And calibration. This is more with colors and things again. And I think for this one, there's one of these. Yeah, I think it's just this one that can have an impact on the colors in mine. But I don't think there's anything here. Oh, this one does nice color changes as well. I like that and that. But I'm going to stick with my orange and blue here. So I've done everything I want on this, and I'll hit OK and apply it. And you can see the difference, right? It's kind of darker, slightly hazy, and with the Camera Raw edits, everything just comes better into focus. The color's brighter. That haziness has been fixed. The darkness has been fixed. And that's all there is to it. This is a finished final product. Just make sure, you want to have the blend, that gradient blend going on. You want to have the chrome type in there. Have, some other small type going on and some kind of secondary design element going on as well as the textures, and then that final Camera Raw edit.